Yeah.
What's your second choice?
So my second choice, because I've got a few, like I say, in this, and they're horses for courses. But this, if I was looking at something from the perspective of having something in a small room, and something in the near field, maybe at the end of the desk or within a couple of meters, the DALI Menuet SE, which retails in the UK for £1,500. I was hugely impressed with that.
Yeah, that's a nice speaker.
So compared to the Amphion Argon 1, it's a smaller speaker. It sounds smaller. It's nowhere near as dynamic, but it's even cleaner. And it's, I think, in terms of clarity, it's up there with, you know, your $2,000 ATCs and your ProAX. Like you say, there's a lot of speakers these days that are fairly well balanced. I think engineers know that how to engineer around that, unless they're going for something entirely different. But not many of them have what I consider natural tonality. So if you play a lot of acoustic instruments, vocals, you know, jazz, quartets, etc., at some point, playing some tracks, I'm not saying all the time, most speakers will reveal themselves to show something unnatural in the tonality.
Right.
And there's only, I think, on one hand, a number of speakers that I've heard since I've started this channel that I'd say that basically have a natural tonality. And DALI Menuet has that. Yes, limited bass, limited dynamics, but excellent clarity and just beautiful tonality.
Interesting you mentioned DALI, because Brian and I recently interviewed the North American manager for DALI. Actually, he's based in Montreal. And now that DALI has Lenbrook as their distribution in the US and Canada, DALI is probably going to be a much more popular brand finally. Because the thing about DALI's always been big in the UK. It's always been big in Europe. But in North America, it's always been very hit and miss. So it's here, and then it disappears for 2 years, and then it comes back. And I think they needed a company like Lenbrook that has a very established dealer network and also an established sales force who can get DALI in front of the right people. And I wouldn't even be surprised if you see DALI in Best Buy soon. Like, I mean, DALI's going to end up in Magnolia, like their sort of high-end part of Best Buy. And were you aware that DALI is the second largest manufacturer of loudspeaker cabinets? The DALI marketing manager dropped that little bit of information on Brian and I, and we were kind of like, what? He's like, yes. He's like, we are the second largest manufacturer of cabinets.
So they must be making cabinets for other speaker manufacturers.
Yeah. He said, I think he said that it was either, I think Klipsch might be the largest.
Right.
But DALI is second.
Wow.
And so it's sort of like, it started to make sense why all of a sudden DALI has the resources to make such really good affordable, because that's the other thing about DALI. DALI has always been perceived, at least on my end, to be a very high performance, great value type of product, that the loudspeakers have always been very affordable. DALI has some expensive products, and they have a new $100,000 speaker coming out relatively soon, actually this month. But some of their best products are like the one, you know, that you like, the ones that are sort of below 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. That's sort of like their bread and butter. I mean, and that's where they generate probably 80+% of all their sales. And, apparently DALI is a much more advanced technologically company than I think a lot of audiophiles sort of know.
Well, they develop pretty much, from what I can understand, everything in-house, the drivers and et cetera.
The screws. I don't know if you can see it on your speaker, but DALI is actually engraved in every screw. Apparently every component, including obviously because they make their own drivers, every component in their speakers is basically done in-house. Yeah. That's very rare. I don't think consumers, even audiophiles, appreciate how rare it is for a company to make everything in-house. There's not that many. Which amplifiers do you actually like?
Well, I was just going to come on to that. So the interesting thing is that, you know, my reference, the reason I've reviewed a lot of speakers around 2,000-3,000 pounds was I was looking at something to replace my ProAX. When I initially started, I think we spoke about this before, I was expecting them 20-odd-year-old speakers to get blown out of the water. That didn't happen.
That's heresy. I can't believe it. I heard the words replace my ProAX.
I thought, you know, these 20, you don't know, do you? If you hear things at shows, you haven't got a clue really what things sound like until you get them home. And I thought do you know what? I've loved these old Exposure 21 pre and 18 mono blocks for ages, and the Proax, but I'm going to quickly find out that these are out of date. That's what my expectation was, and that isn't what transpired. So so what I've realized is now over 2.5 years is how good that Exposure Proact combination that I have is, and how relatively rare. I'm in the process of reviewing some much more expensive amplifiers than my Exposures, things up to £6,000-7,000. I'm thinking, okay, there's something that I particularly value, which is that mid-range tonality. That I want something that's very clean, so you hear deep into a recording, but has all those little nuanced touches in the mid-range. And my Exposure and Proact combination gives me that. But their modern equivalents are probably £8,000.
Right.
So if someone was asking me if I wanted a scaled down version of that, it would be, all right, you have to have it set up right. It'd have to be, like I say, in relatively near field. It would be the DALI Menuet SEs with the Exposure 2510 amp.
Okay.
Now, I don't love all Exposure amps. I have to say, the 3510, the big brother to the 2510, I reviewed as well. And I expected it just to be a bigger version of the 2510. And it is much more capable in some ways. It drives a lot harder speakers. It's a lot more dynamic. It's even a little bit cleaner, but it doesn't have that natural tonality in the mid-range that my old Exposure amps have and the 2510 has. And it's a different kind of design. The preamplifier stage is totally different.
See, that's interesting, because I think consumers incorrectly assume because it's newer and because it's bigger and because the specs might tell a different story, oh, it has to be better. Yeah. And in the case of high-end audio, especially as a publication that covers so much vintage, but in my mind, see, I like 90s vintage. So like the classic Mark Levinson, Krell, Spectral, YBA, Conrad Johnson, Bryston amplifiers of that era, I still think sound magnificent. And I just like the magazines have to have something new to write about. Right. So, yes. But
yes. No, so that Exposure 2510, which is £1,700 now, and the DALI Menuet SEs, if you wanted a small room setup, I can't think of anything that would touch that if you have the priorities that I have as a listener.
And how many £1,000 would that combination be?
So you're looking at what, 1,500 and 1,700, 3,200 for amp and speakers. Yes, you need to add a DAC and
a source.
You're probably going to have, and both those components deserve a decent DAC. So I'm looking at Denefrips Aries as a minimum, perhaps even the Pontus. It's just superb in that mid-range. Just to give you goosebumps. It'll make the hairs at the back of your, if I had any hairs at the back of my neck.
My problem is if I don't cut my hair every 4 weeks, so I look like Jerry Garcia.
I shaved for a change.
Yeah, no, actually, I didn't shave today. I've had a very trying summer, and I've done my best to look as presentable as possible.
Well, I thought this is the
new space.
My new space, which isn't decorated. So I thought, if that doesn't look too presentable, at least I can make it.
Exactly. Now, my final choice is one that you and I both agree upon, and we've discussed this speaker numerous times. We are both big fans of the Acoustic Energy AE1, and the AE1 is a active loudspeaker. It has Class A amplifiers for both the tweeter and the woofers in both cabinets.
Class AB.
Class AB. And which is another reason why they are chunky monkeys. They are not light speakers. There's no Class D in those cabinets, and the heat sinks on the back should be your first sign. My only gripe with the AE1, I know people at Acoustic Energy are going to be like, "Oh my God, he's going to say something negative about our speaker finally." I don't like the fact that it's limited, obviously to the one source. And that, at least in the case of the version that I have, it doesn't matter if you use the balanced input or the single-ended input, you're still limited to one source. So you have to use either a DAC with a headphone, with a volume control, or you need to use a preamplifier, with these speakers, which obviously, the trade-off is obviously you don't have to buy a power amplifier, because the power amplifier that's built into the AE1 is a very good power amplifier. And as evidenced by the sound quality. You and I could talk about the speaker for hours on YouTube if we had to. And even though I reviewed this speaker like well over a year ago, maybe even 18 months ago. Wow, the pandemic has messed with one's memory. I still haven't heard anything in its class at $1,500 US that that actually even touches it. And it's like, even if I connected like a decent Cambridge Audio amplifier to a good pair of bookshelf speakers, like a pair of Wharfdales,
Yeah.
I still think the Acoustic Energy AE1 stomps it into the ground, like buries it, jumps on the dirt, throws the shovel away. It's remarkable to me how few hi-fi. I think you and I might be the only hi-fi reviewers who have actually given this speaker its proper due. And I find that very strange, because anyone who's ever listened to the speaker has walked away and been like, holy hell. And what I also like about it is the fact that because because you need to run basically a line stage into the back of, you can alter the final sound of these speakers. You're not stuck with just the speaker itself and the sound of the amplifier. I have run half a dozen DACs with volume controls or line stages into the back of the AE1. Every combination sounds different. And, from a reviewing tool, that's great. But I have to say, the ability to put the AE1 on a pair of stands, run a set of long interconnects to a hidden rack, and be done with it, and not have speaker cables, running along the floor to a big amplifier. They know that the dog can, because like my dog enjoys for some reason licking the front of my Cambridge Edge A, which drives me insane. But you're taking a couple things out of the chain. Yeah. And as a result, I think the sound quality goes up a couple notches. And
so go on. That speaker here in the UK is £1,050.
That's a steal. I mean, come on.
So, yeah, that's crazy. As you say, inside there is 4 Class AB amplifiers, 1 for each driver in each speaker. And I just thought that is probably single-handedly the most bang for your buck that I think I've come across.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've written this in a couple of columns recently, that if I had to start completely all over again, like basically I had to get rid of everything and I had to start from scratch with a pair of speakers, I picked those.
The control in the bottom end, because it's an active design. So for those viewers who, a lot of my bugbear is, and I think it's different in America, I think perhaps powered speakers do get called active, but from an engineering perspective, an active speaker is something that has an active crossover, not a passive crossover.
Right.
So this is a proper active design, which means there's nothing between the amplifier and those drivers. They're directly coupled to them. And it shows just in the clarity and the control that speaker has.
The bass is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just the tightness of the bass.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you got something like an Audiolab 6000A, which is a good amplifier, you know it well, you've owned one, and a Wharfdale speaker at £600-700, and the amplifier £600, you're looking at £1,400, and my money would still be on the AE1s.
Yeah. I remember when I first got them, and what did I play? I played some electronic music. It may have been oh my god, my brain this summer. But I played some electronic music. Oh, I played Tool Lateralis. Tool Lateralis is hell for any high-end speaker. And I remember I brought it to a hi-fi show years ago, and the manufacturer took one look at the cover, and he's like, "I'm not playing that." and he played it, and the room filled up, and the people in the back of the room were like, "This is the speaker is awesome." And the guy looked at me like, what have you done? Let me have this album. So I put on Tool Lateralis through the Acoustic Energy AE1, and I cranked it. And I mean, really cranked it. And even though there was a lot of bass in my office, and it's a big room, it's 33 by 13.
Yeah.
It was so clean. And the definition in the bass was so tight, and the articulation and the speed. It is a very fast sounding speaker, and I have played a lot of electronic music through it. I've played a lot of classic rock, heavy metal. I've played death metal. I've played obviously jazz and blues and classical. But this is a speaker that if you get it set up in the right space, it'll shock you how much bass, but how much really well-defined bass you can reproduce. And it's like, I don't know, the high-end audio press just looks at it and goes,
it's not flashy. It's not
No.
flashy, and it's not a quick demo impress you with how super hyped up the bass and how super hyped up the treble is. It's a speaker that you appreciate over a period of time. I do have a gripe with it though.
Okay, and, go for it.
My gripe is the volume control. So
yeah, I hate it. It.
Yeah, I understand the reason why Acoustic Energy went, and I applaud them for it. In fact, I had the conversation with Ben at ATC and said to him, listen, your active speakers are so good, but you only start with the 19s. Why don't you do one for the 11s or the 7s? Well, the Acoustic Energy is effectively that, I think. You know, so it's a proper analog active speaker, no DSP trickery, which I think DSP does some fine things in the bass. I just haven't heard a natural one in the mid-range and the top end. The issue I have is that because they've gone traditional analog active, there's no easy way to control the volume and match them on each speaker. So what you wind up doing is turning, you have to, it's like
I'm demonstrating how to change the volume on the Acoustic Energy AE1. You have to reach behind and hopefully find the volume.
Yes. And then you have to try and adjust the balance so that both speakers are at the same volume. So I think they need to come up with some microprocessor controlled volume control. Keep the speaker completely analog, but have some digital volume control that that means that you can just basically press a button and adjust the volume.
Well, I asked them about that because I was because initially when I had them set up, you know, I was running my iMac through a DAC with a volume control into the back of the speakers. And what they basically said to me was, just turn the analog volume control on both speakers to max, and just leave it.
Well, then I have a problem with that because that's fine. But if you're running it through RC, if you're running it through XLR, you're not likely to have a problem. But if you've got 4 or 5 meters of RCA running through them, there's a good chance that you're going to pick up some noise and that's going to get amplified. I did actually with one of the DACs have a bit of that because it was a little bit noisy on its RCA output. And it was fine on the XLR. So that's another tip. If you're getting those, you're going to have to spend a bit of money on a preamp with XLR outputs. So, you know,
there's definitely a trade-off.
Yeah. So, you know, but that's the gripe, but it is a very impressive speaker.
It is. And I wish, actually in many ways, I hope more North American audio writers don't write about it because yes, exactly.
Although there might be a few thousand people who now are well and truly let in. Shall I go with my final choice?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, so before I go to my final choice, there is something that I need to say. There's 2 speakers that I haven't reviewed that I'd like to review, but and I'll explain the reasons. One is the ProAc D2 non-R version. I always find that when I've heard the R one, which has mainly been at shows, and it's been a couple of times with name amplification, it sounded a bit bright. But the non-R version has the soft dome tweeter. The R version is the ribbon tweeter.
Yeah.
So the D2 is the big brother to the current version of my ProAc Response 1 SEs. That was a personal favorite of Stuart Tyler's, who's the founder and designer of ProAc, obviously sadly passed away recently. And I had a conversation with him and he always loved that. So I'd like to review that at some point. For whatever reason, ProAc are very selective about who they want to send their products out to review, so they don't send them out to YouTubers, so it may not change. But if I might try and borrow one from a dealer if they'll lend it for me long enough and see if I can have a look at that. So that's one which should be on my radar. The other is the Dynaudio Special 40. I've heard that in a number of demos and it's been very impressive. It needs a lot of amplification power. It's always surrounded with very big amps, and it's normally pulled well into the room because I think it probably produces an awful lot of bass. Those are the 2 speakers that I'd love to review. But in the absence of having had hands-on experience in my home, the one speaker that perhaps, it is the best sounding speaker that I've reviewed, sub £3,000, is the ATC SEM19. Now, that is a 2-way. It's not as old-fashioned looking in the new modern cabinets because it's got some rounded edges, but it's a sealed box enclosure. Before you step into the ATC 3-ways, it's their biggest 2-way design. And it's got amazing clarity. You just hear, it's actually cleaner than my ProAc Response 1 SEs.
Wow.
I hear even more of what's on the recording, and it's not got the most amount of bass. It's a much bigger speaker than my Pro Axe, and it starts to roll off at around 50 odd hertz.
Okay.
But it rolls off quite gradually. Being a sealed box, they do tend to the bass is there. It's just not as prominent.
Right,
and I do think that in order to get the best out of them, sub is essential, and you're going to spend some money on some decent subs. So you're going to be looking at, £1,000 for a pair of subwoofers, and that does change the presentation. The other issue with that is that it's very revealing. So it's got beautiful tonality, but it's going to let you know exactly what you've got in the recording and further up the chain.
Yeah.
So I had a Hagel H160 at the time, which is 150 watts per channel. That sounded thin in the mid-ranges. The H190 doesn't, but the H160 did have a thin sounding mid-range. That was all too apparent when I put the ATCs on. My Pro Axe lets you know as well, but it doesn't make it so obvious. The ATCs just make everything very obvious. Any harshness in your source, it's going to be, it's going to tell you.
Do they make their own drivers?
Yeah, they do. Yeah,
okay.
So they're basically from the Pro Audio field as well, and they do an active version, which is hugely impressive.
Yeah,
but it's over £3,000. It's actually a bookshelf speaker, but in a floor standing cabinet, because the bottom half is basically given over to the amplification. And the other thing is it needs a lot of power. There's not a small moving mass. It's quite a heavy moving mass. I think it's a sandwich type construction, and it has some kind of PVC coating. So you need a lot of power. And I thought my exposure monoblocks were up to the task at they're about 75 watts a piece and got plenty of current. And they were, but I felt that that's the only time with any bookshelf speaker around that price that I felt, oh, I wish I had even more power. I wish I had something like a Cambridge Edge or a big musical Fidelity or something to throw at it and just see how that works.
It's and I've saying it's in many ways. I mean, they sounded like a lot more robust speaker than the classic 4.5s from Spender. But I guess being a sealed box, the Spender. I mean, the ATCs sound like they have a lot more output. But my experience with the Spender Classic series is that bass is not their forte. I mean, like no one's buying a pair of 4.5s or 2.3s because they're bass monsters. I think also because ATC comes from the pro audio sort of world. I mean, that they sell a lot in the pro audio space. Yeah. So my impression of ATC has always been that they look like speakers that could take thousands of watts of power, and they would just be like, thanks. Well, thanks a lot.
They are like PMC. They're designed to be put in studios and play loud, and they don't play very. 19s aren't the best speaker to have at late night listening if you want to play at low volumes.
Okay.
Even with relatively big amplifiers, it's just the moving mass of the cones is too much. You're probably better off with a traditional British monitor like the Spendor if that's what you're doing. But if you've got a big power amp, that's what ATC I think recommends 75 watts as a minimum. When I've been talking to them, they say, listen, you just need a bit of voltage to wake them up.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a pain in the backside to build a system around it, and it's going to cost money because you're going to have to get good quality stuff that's got plenty of power, and that doesn't come cheap.
Right, and that's the rub actually with a lot of these really, really affordable, bookshelf speakers below £3,000 is that when you finally when you realize just how good they are, you start to realize, oh, I may need to spend a lot more. And because I remember when I was listening to the Edge A, which is like now it's actually gone up even more. I think it's 6,500 now. With the Synchrony B600s, we were already at almost $9,000. And so 9,000. I mean, and some audiophiles will say $9,000 is not a big deal for a pair of bookshelf speakers and a really, really high end integrated amplifier. But then I have people who read my Edge A article and watched our video on integrated amplifiers and said that you and I were full of it, because anyone who thinks that the Cambridge Audio Edge A is a high-end audio amplifier obviously has their brains stuffed with Marks and Sparks canned spam. But I was
you're always going to get some.
I know, but it's just like I mean, I remember when I listened to the Synchrony B600 and I really gave it a little bit of grunt, and I let the Edge A open up. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, would I need anything better or more than this at $10,000 retail? And the answer was no. Paul Barton has reason to be proud of himself for building a $2,700 speaker that sounds this good.
Well, the ATC seem to be in a similar fashion. They're £2,300. I know they're a lot more in America. I think they're almost double. You wind up paying like the equivalent of 4K. I think they just, it's just the way the distribution works. But there aren't many things where you get a Hagel H190 or either the predecessor, the 160, 150 watts per channel, and you think, do you know what? I wish I had something bigger. I think it was Ben Holzer, who's the designer for Hagel. He said that the 190 is capable for driving 95% of the speakers or something on the planet. Well, this probably falls into the 5% category where you wish you had probably the 390 or something.
Yeah.
So
this is where you want the Edge A monoblocks to, yeah. See, but this also proves to me, I mean, like the 6 or 7 models that we've recommended, that you can build a truly reference quality high-end system with a $2,000, $3,000 speaker. It's what you build it around. That's the other thing. I hope people who have watched, I've read the comments on YouTube, and I think people have been very, very gracious. I think people have really liked these videos.
No, they do, and I think the engagement's been really good. I think so. I would like to formally thank everybody who watches and comments, and of course, you know, we don't get a chance to review everything. There'll be stuff that we've probably missed that people will think, well, what about that? But I can only talk about stuff that I've got direct experience. You know, I think I'm quite pleased with what my selection is. I'm sure the same for you.
Yeah, and actually, but now I want to find the Amphion. So you've piqued my curiosity enough.
Yes. Well, I hope people have enjoyed this. Just like to thank you, Ian, again for your time and coming on.
No, I appreciate it. It's been my first video this summer, so it's nice.
Yeah, no, it's been a little time since we did this. So no, thank you for coming on. Thank you, viewers, for watching. Please do leave your suggestions. Let us know about what you think about our suggestions as well. And until next time, the British Audiophile signing off. Ian, do you want to say bye?
From both America and Canada, where I've spent most of the summer. Cheers.